Chapter 696, Giant Guardian. As the tyrannical aura flew past, high in the sky, Anderson's chewing came to a sudden halt. It was only when the entity was a distance away did he swallow the remaining rabbit meat. He looked up at German Sparrow.
That was the dragon you were talking about?
Klein nodded slightly, confirming Anderson's guess. The corners of Anderson's mouth slowly curled up, revealing an expression as though he was at a loss on whether to laugh or cry.
I thought you were talking about a mature or adolescent dragon, the one that just flew past. I probably won't be able to become a dragon hunter. Dragon feces, perhaps?
The tyrannical feeling that the King of the North exudes is indeed a little terrifying. Compared to the pieced-together monster which made hair grow without restraint on the future, it's a lot stronger. Perhaps it's a sequence 4, at the level of a demigod.
Klein calmly made a judgment without revealing any hints of panic or horror. He clearly remembered that Grozel's travels had clearly indicated that the female pirate had managed to succeed in escaping from the King of the North's attack before meeting up with the team led by the main lead, Grozel. And Edwina Edwards clearly wasn't a demigod. She was a sequence 5 of the reader pathway. Furthermore, as she was suddenly swallowed by the book, certain mystical items and sealed artifacts that she didn't permanently keep on her person were left in the captain's cabin. The tools she had that were useful to her were probably limited to 1 or 2. Under such a situation, she was able to defend against the King of the North and survive. Having just advanced and having adjusted his inventory, Klein believed that it wouldn't faze him too much. Furthermore, he was still connected to the gray fog. He could use the sea god scepter to produce a response. This was also why Klein dared to enter directly after confirming that Danitz was in an ordinary state during his prayer.
Yes, the King of the North doesn't seem like a demigod from a normal pathway. According to Vice Admiral Iceberg, it's a rampager who gathers frost-related Beyonder characteristics, and it can match a demigod in certain domains, but would have flaws in other aspects. Edwina, Anderson, and I, along with the Beyonders of the main leads team, we wouldn't be helpless. If all else fails, I can still use the Sea God Scepter. I don't believe that this book can defend against items above the gray fog. If it could, it would have shown it long ago.
Standing beside the fire, Klein looked down at Anderson and grinned.
Are you afraid?
Anderson was taken aback as he immediately beamed.
Not at all. You seem to be very confident.
After saying that, he looked at Danitz, who was still trembling and trying hard to compose himself before T.S. King.
Do you know what's the most important thing for a man?
Danitz had just taken a deep breath. He was stunned by what he heard, as he held his right index finger and middle finger together, pointing to his crotch with uncertainty. Anderson blinked before he roared with laughter.
Bastard, you really are a crude pirate. Ha-ha, I wanted to say something, but ha-ha, I can't remember it. Oh right, I wanted to say courage. Courage is the most important thing for a man. Look at you. The dragon hasn't even attacked, and you're almost hugging your head and begging for mercy.
Danitz's face instantly flushed red as he glared at Anderson.
You weren't acting like this back at Toscarter.
Klein couldn't help but lampoon. Danitz was just about to make it clear that he was only influenced by the high-level creature when he suddenly recalled what was just said. His expression was immediately restored to normal as he casually replied,
I can't compare with dragon feces at all.
Anderson's smile froze as he coughed lightly. As though nothing had happened, he yanked off a rabbit's leg and handed it over to German Sparrow.
Want a bite?
Klein remained silent for a few seconds before he slowly shook his head.
This is a strange world. Before confirming that there aren't any problems, it's best not to eat anything here. Perhaps it might be a piece of rabbit meat that will make you stay here forever.
Pause. Anderson moved the roasted rabbit's leg to his nose before slowly putting it down. Following that, his face collapsed.
Why didn't you say so earlier?
Klein calmly replied.
I just thought of this problem.
Anderson's expression turned twisted as he lowered his head. He quickly bit down on his roasted rabbit leg.
Aren't you afraid that something really bad will happen?
The strongest hunter's actions alarmed Danitz. Anderson laughed helplessly.
I've already eaten one earlier. I've already digested it by now. Since there's no way of turning back, I might as well focus on enjoying it.
Klein and Danitz were momentarily at a loss for words. After Anderson finished gnawing on the rabbit's leg, he deliberated and asked,
Are you really not eating? We have no idea how much time we'll be spending here. If we really do starve, how are we supposed to fight the dragon?
Klein didn't reply. He took out his golden pocket watch and opened it.
It's 6:10 in the evening outside. We'll eat a little after 4 to 6 hours if nothing happens to you.
Pause. Anderson turned agape, speechless. Klein ignored him and turned to say to Danitz,
15 minutes break. We'll search for your captain after that.
As he said that, he had already taken out the pearl earring belonging to Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards.
All right.
Danitz suddenly felt pumped with his blood boiling, completely forgetting the cold outside, but after about 8 seconds, he huddled close to the fire again. Around 7 in the evening in the outside world, Klein pressed down on his hat and held his cane. Together with Danitz and Anderson, he followed the revelation provided by his divination and found their way to a mountain. After circling the boulders which were encased in thick layers of ice, they saw a dark mountain cave. Standing by the entrance was a woman holding an ancient bow. The woman had a head of soft, lustrous black hair, which she had simply tied into a pigtail. Her facial features were soft, making her look different from any national of the northern continent. She wore a brown, ancient-styled hunter's coat and trousers. She acutely cast her gaze over. Upon seeing her slightly sharp ears, Klein immediately guessed her identity from matching her to the content in Grozel's travels. She was the female elf who got to know the giant, Grozel, at the very beginning. Her name was unknown.
Compared to Earth, people from the northern continent look more Caucasian, but this elf has more of an oriental charm.
Klein quickly concluded this particular trait.
An elf! She's identical to the elves drawn in the ancient church drawings. I have to negotiate with her to get her to be my model so that I can draw a few portraits of her.
By the side, Danitz scoffed. He mocked in a succinct manner.
Boorish.
Clearly, he hadn't forgotten Anderson's previous mockery.
Do you only know of that kind of drawing?
Anderson shot a glance at him, sped up, and walked towards the female elf. Just as he approached, the female elf didn't hesitate to raise her bow. The arrow strung on it shimmered with silver lightning.
Wait.
Anderson immediately raised his hands.
It's useless. The elves mostly belong to the storm pathway. They are prone to being irascible and rash.
Klein secretly activated his spirit body threads, planning to achieve initial control over the elf in order to let her listen calmly. At this moment, Anderson saw a blur before seeing 2 thick, huge, muscular, grayish-blue legs. Embedded in the snow was a huge, terrifying sword. Anderson was horrified to realize that his height only reached the leg's knees. He instinctively followed the sword and looked up, bit by bit. With his head almost completely facing upwards, he finally saw the giant, who was nearly 4 meters tall. The giant's skin was grayish-blue. His abdomen and waist was covered in a thick, furry beast hide, leaving him naked everywhere else. Even his legs lacked protection. He pounded on the sword, which was wider than a human door, and using his trademark single vertical eye to look at Anderson, Klein, and Danitz, he asked with a booming voice,
Who are you? Why are you here in the Grozel camp?
Klein was just about to reply when a familiar figure suddenly walked out from the dark mountain cave. Danitz's eyes were instantly filled with ecstasy. Dressed in a complicated shirt and dark-colored trousers, Edwina swept her gaze across the trio. Her usually cold expression revealed a rather flabbergasted look, as though she hadn't expected to see German Sparrow and Anderson Hood here. She quickly composed herself and looked up at the giant.
Grosel, they are my companions.
Grosel widened his huge mouth into a grin and asked, in delight,
Are you also here to help deal with Yulisan?
Yulisan? Klein was momentarily left at a loss for an answer. At that moment, he saw Edwina, who was standing in the giant's shadow, give him a look. She wanted him to give an affirmative answer.
Yulisan is the king of the north?
Klein replied in thought,
Yes.
Haha, then we are friends.
Grosel looked down at the trio and laughed. As he spoke, Anderson silently retreated back to Gehrman Sparrow's side as he said under his breath,
This is the first time I'm meeting a living giant. There's no way of hitting his vital spots. He's just too tall.
You can hit his legs.
Klein lampooned and calmly replied,
A huge target makes it easy to strike them.
Pause.
That's right.
Anderson agreed. At that moment, Edwina walked over and introduced the three of them.
This is the leader of the camp, Giant Guardian Grosel. This is the elven songster, Ciadas.
Elven songster? Ocean songster?
Klein suddenly felt that there was hope for Mr. Hanged Man's potion formula. Edwina turned halfway around and said to Grosel and Ciadas,
They are my companions. The strongest adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, treasure hunter, Anderson Hood, and renowned sailor, Danitz.
I always thought Vice Admiral Iceberg was the serious type who never lied. Renowned sailor. Ha, in a certain way, that's true.
Klein took off his hat and gave a serious bow. Anderson followed suit in a rather casual and perfunctory manner. Reeling in his delight that his captain had introduced him as a companion instead of a subordinate, Danitz was slower than the others as he acted in a fluster. Grosel laughed.
Come on in. We will be fighting that evil dragon Yulisan at any moment now.
How warm and amiable. But be it the churches, canon, or the myths of the City of Silver, giants are extremely violent creatures who have a strong desire for destruction. Yes, anything is possible in a book. It all depends on whether the author can make everything flow nicely.
Klein nodded slightly as he followed Grosel into the spacious cave. When Edwina saw this, she approached the trio without showing any signs of abnormal behavior. As though she was leading the way, she whispered,
The history they speak of is a little odd. Same for their language. Regardless of the language they speak, all of us can understand it.
Chapter 697, Stories Progress. Everyone can understand each other regardless of the language used? Klein skipped over Edwina's first sentence and focused his attention on the second sentence that didn't seem too problematic. Although this was the book world created by Grosel's travels, everything was possible, but there were certain details that still revealed problems. To Klein, he wasn't too caught up with how they could understand each other, but the kind of method that resulted in the comprehension.
This world incorporates something akin to the rule of language comprehension, or does it have a consciousness residing high above everyone else, helping in the real-time translation work, just like what I do at the tarot gatherings? If it were the former, targets who don't understand Jotun will only hear an unfamiliar language, but they would understand the meaning. If it were the latter, it will be them hearing a language they're familiar with.
As he knew many ancient and supernatural languages, Klein was unable to figure out the situation immediately. He slowed down his footsteps and walked alongside Danitz. He asked while suppressing his voice,
Can you tell what language Grosel was using when he was speaking?
Danitz was taken aback for 1 second. He recalled and said,
It's a language which sounds a little familiar yet unfamiliar, but I was able to understand everything.
The supernatural languages he knew were ancient Hermes, followed by Elvish. He was only a beginner in Jotun.
Yes, it's something like the rule of language comprehension. It's comprehension at the level of the mind. This means that the entire book world's fundamental rules can be different from the outside world. It's a setting that it comes with, but the changes don't seem capable of exceeding certain limits. This point remains suspect and requires verification. After all, I can't eliminate the existence of someone like the Fool, someone who completely interprets the communication via the mind. Edwina is indeed sharp and good at observing. The problem she discovered leads straight to this book, World's Essence.
Amidst his thoughts, Klein unhurriedly entered the huge, dark cave. As for the history described by the members of the main lead's team, he wasn't the least bit surprised. He even looked forward to hearing the details. Klein long knew that the various churches in the northern continent's countries had consciously attempted to destroy or conceal information, to hide the true history of the fourth epoch, third epoch, and even the second epoch. What people knew as common knowledge actually differed from the people who used to live in those eras. This was also one of the reasons why Klein took on the risk to enter the book world. Inside the spacious and windy cave, a bonfire scattered its light and heat on 3 humanoid figures. One of them was a middle-aged man in an extremely Spartan white robe. He had wrinkles but didn't appear old. He had his back to the fire as he faced the stone wall with his eyes closed, focused on his prayers. He had short brown hair, and his shoulders, arms, calves, and feet were exposed, revealing all kinds of old scars. Beside him was a lad using a stone for a pillow. He donned a black, heavy, full-body armor. By his hand was an erected black sword that emitted a cold, shimmering light. His facial features were rather deep, giving him clear Loan traits. Sitting opposite the two was a man in his 30s who was dressed strangely. He gave people a sense of unease. He wore a sharp and hard black hat, and his coat's buttons were mismatched. It was messy and chaotic, highly asymmetric and unharmonious. In addition, the tips of his leather boots curled up high, making him look like a circus clown. This man had quite a handsome face. He had flaxen-colored hair, deep brown eyes, a high nose, and thin lips. Even though he sat there, he gave off an arrogant feeling. Yewina pointed at him and said,
Solomon Empire's Viscount Mobet Zoroast, a gentleman who can take away the ideals and dreams of others.
You don't have to mince your words. Hello there, I'm a Sequence 5 Dream Stealer of the Marauder Pathway.
Mobet said with a chuckle. He acted nothing like the arrogance he seemed to exude.
A member of the Zoroast family. The angel parasitizing Leonard's body is from this family. Perhaps they know each other? I now know the name of Sequence 4 and 5 of the Marauder Pathway, but I don't even know the corresponding Sequence 6 and 7.
Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he maintained his stoic look. At that moment, Anderson warmly greeted him with a smile and asked as though they were pals.
To be frank, this is the first time I'm hearing of Dream Stealer. I only know of Marauder and Swindler. There are 2 sequences in the middle I'm not aware of. Are the Beyonders of this pathway already so scarce? Doesn't Edwina know? Sequence 7, Cryptologist, and Sequence 6, Prometheus. Haha, let me do the introductions. The pious ascetic, Snowman. He believes in the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God. Don't mind him. He's completely sealed himself in his beliefs. But in combat, he's a very reliable companion. Snowman, you should say something at the very least.
Mobet warmly pointed to the praying man whose back was facing everyone. Mobet, who didn't receive a response, stroked his chin with a rueful smile.
This is the treatment I often receive. You might find it hard to imagine that I was an arrogant, reserved, and refined nobleman, but time has changed everything. That happens when your companion is a giant who only knows how to chuckle foolishly and shout slogans.
When he said this, Grosel, who was sitting on a rock, smiled in a simple and good-natured manner. He raised his hand to scratch the back of his head, as his single vertical eye didn't show the ferocity and cruelness that giants were strongly rumored to have. Mobet shook his head and pointed at the ascetic, Snowman.
As for him, he might not speak a single word for years or even a decade. Siadas is a very violent woman. As long as there are any emotional stirrings in her, she'll beat me up. Sigh, I'm as afraid of her now as I was infatuated over her back then. Therefore, I can only make conversation and speak to them. Otherwise, I'll definitely go mad. Thankfully, Frunziar came later. He's quite the conversationalist. Hey Frunziar, wake up! We have new companions.
The sleeping black-armored knight slowly woke up as he looked at Klein and company. Suddenly, there was a sound of metal striking each other as he stood up. Staring at Klein, he said,
Low and Ace?
Yes.
Klein nodded frankly. He discovered that this Lowen soldier, who had gone missing for 165 years, didn't look old. He had black hair and sharp blue eyes. He made one submit to him unknowingly. Frunziar appeared adrift for a moment as he quickly composed himself.
Do you know of Backland's Edward family?
Backland has many Edwards.
Klein replied simply.
The Edward family that lives at 18 Delahire Street in Northwest Borough.
Frunziar pressed anxiously. Klein shook his head.
Northwest Borough no longer exists.
Northwest Borough no longer exists.
Frunziar repeated those words as his voice grew softer. He fell silent for a few seconds before exhaling.
I've no idea how many years have passed outside, but it should have been quite a while. Edwina told me the actual year, but I don't remember the year I entered. I was sleeping most of the time, and time here seems to be frozen.
Mobet Zoroast chuckled upon hearing that.
That's because you have bad luck. Back when we were passing through cities and villages, everything was perfect.
He looked at Klein, Anderson, and Danitz.
Back then, we lived in places with humans, with intelligent races. We got married again and again, seeing our wives turn old, grow weak, and die. Before a new member joins, we would forget our goals. We would lead ordinary but happy and relaxed lives for decades or centuries. The only con is that we aren't able to bear our own children. Later, Frunziar came. We entered this region blanketed by ice and snow. We hunted many monsters, but gradually, we began to fall into a slumber. We were seldom awake until we met Edwina.
This means that time in the book world flows normally. The story's progress is maintained by a certain power that influences the main lead's party. Before new members join, and before the book's pages flip, they'll stop and stay at a certain node, doing other things. This is similar to the intertranslation of languages at the mind level. Conversely, does this also mean that towns and villages in the book world also develop normally? Yes, I have to quickly find King of the North Ulissan. Otherwise, with the passage of time, we might also experience that influence and fall into a slumber or forget the main quest. We'll stay here for a long period of time until a new member is swallowed into the book and finds us.
Klein fell silent for a few seconds. Just as he was about to say something, Edwina said,
There's no need to worry about that problem. We will soon encounter the King of the North.
Anderson and Mobet asked in unison.
Why? Why?
Edwina surveyed the area and said,
Before I entered, the stuck pages in the book only had a few more pages. And now, with you entering and finding the camp, there definitely can't be many pages left. The story is about to come to an end.
Mobet nodded indiscernibly in agreement with Edwina's judgment. Anderson softly mumbled terms such as stuck. Edwina then introduced Klein, Anderson, and Danitz as she made an example of herself and sat down beside the bonfire. Klein took off his hat and held it with his cane. He slowly sat down and looked at Mobet Zoroast, who was inclined to chat.
Have you heard of the Tudor Empire and the Trunsoist Empire?
He didn't beat around the bush and ask directly. That was Gehrman Sparrow's persona.
No, Edwina has already asked me. In my era, the Tudors and Trunsoists were just like my Zoroast family. We're aristocratic families of the Solomon Empire, and were loyal subjects of the Black Emperor.
Mobet shook his head.
So the Trunsoist and Tudor families were traders of the Solomon Empire.
Klein thought and said,
Apart from you, what other aristocratic families did the Solomon Empire have?
Many. Gustus, Abraham, Zaratul, etc. In my era, the Church of the Evernight Goddess's arch-enemies were the Church of the God of Combat and the Southern Continent's Eggers family. The churches of the Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and the God of knowledge and wisdom were all at odds with each other, all of them hoping to gain the support of the Solomon Empire.
Mobit smiled as he looked at Frunziar. He paused for 2 seconds as his expression gradually turned solemn.
Back then, deities walked the land, and not in the astral world.
Chapter 698, Fifth King of Angels. Deities walked the land and not in the astral world. In the early 4th epoch, during the era of the Solomon Empire, there was no distinguishing between the worlds of myth and reality. Deities directly walked the land without the need for a descent. This is somewhat similar to the second epic as written in the City of Silver's books. The giant king's court and other locations are separated by a door in the real world. They just needed to pass through it and return the same way. Mortals and deities mix together in the chaos and darkness. Also, the astral world really does correspond to deities. After hearing Viscount Mobit Zoroast's description, Klein instantly began connecting the dots. He subconsciously swept a glance at Grozel, as this giant was very likely someone who had experienced the history of the second epoch. Grozel picked up a cup larger than a wooden bucket and gulped down some melted snow as he laughed.
Mobit, what's there to be surprised about? Why are you so solemn?
I've no idea why I became so solemn either.
Bit by bit, Mobit Zoroast revealed a smile.
Aha! It might be something very normal for us, but in their eyes, it's terrifying and unbelievable. I have to use a suitable expression to describe it in order to achieve a satisfactory result. Do you still remember Frunziar's expression when we told him those stories in the very beginning? He almost knelt down to seek forgiveness from the Lord of Storms.
Klein, Danitz, and company were momentarily unsure of the expression of words they should use to respond. Anderson leaned over to Gehrman Sparrow and said with a suppressed voice,
I think he has the talent to be a provoker.
He appeared to be suppressing his voice, but his words could be heard by everyone present. Mobit didn't mind as he chuckled before continuing.
I know that you aren't very convinced, and find it unbelievable that deities walk the lands, just like Edwina's previous reactions. I can give you 2 examples. The chasm of storm on Pasu Island and the tenebrous heaven in the Amantha mountain range were the divine kingdoms of the Lord of Storms and Evernite. They were divine kingdoms located on land. They were divine kingdoms separated from the real world by a mere illusory door.
Pasu Island? Isn't that where the holy altar of the Church of Storms is? The Amantha mountain range? Amantha means serenity in Hermes. This refers to a holy cathedral, the Cathedral of Serenity. When the deities no longer walked the land, their kingdoms became the headquarters of their respective churches?
Klein instinctively believed that Mobit Zoroast wasn't lying as he used it to come to certain conclusions. Danitz was puzzled and horrified by what he heard. He subconsciously wanted to leave, but when he saw his captain listening attentively, Gehrman Sparrow, who was in thought, and Anderson Hood, who wore a look of interest on his face, he could only hold back his urge as he sought a better, more comfortable seating position. At that moment, the elven songster Ciatis, who was in charge of the perimeter, walked in and said with contempt,
Do not mention that fake god. The authority of the storm only belongs to the king of us elves.
Her voice was clear and beautiful, but her tone was filled with anger and irascibility. It felt as though she would raise her hands at any moment to shoot an arrow at Mobit Zoroast.
All right, I will use the words fake god.
Mobit raised his hand to adjust his sharp and hard black hat. Ciatis retracted her gaze. She then said to the former Loan soldier, Frunziar Edward, who wasn't a staunch believer of the Lord of Storms,
It's your turn.
Frunziar raised his head a little, his expression in a trance-like state. Apparently, he hadn't noticed the conversation and argument from before. He drew the iron black sword beside him and walked towards the cave entrance. Klein observed for a moment and took the opportunity to speak to the elf, Ciatis.
Do you know of Queen of Calamity, Kohinum?
He wasn't actually sure if Kohinum was Elf King Sonithrim's subsidiary god, Queen of Calamity. His inquiry was for elven songster Ciatis to give him the answer. Ciatis's gentle and exquisite face immediately produced a trance-like expression like Frunziar's.
I haven't heard her name in a long time. She is the queen of us elves. Mobit and Frunziar didn't even know of her existence. Where did you encounter her? No. Learn of her situation.
As she spoke, Ciatis's tone became urgent. At that moment, Danitz looked at Gehrman Sparrow in surprise, reflecting over the revelation that the madman was so knowledgeable. He was even able to share a common topic of interest with an elf from ancient times.
I never expected you to be a scholar. I really couldn't tell. Couldn't tell at all.
Anderson sighed as he shook his head. Sass. Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina likewise cast her gaze at Klein. Her limpid blue eyes had a strong desire to learn from him. Sass. Klein answered frankly,
I've once entered a ruin belonging to Queen of Calamity Kohinnim and obtained some items.
Ruin?
Ciatis ruminated over that word in a soft voice, her tone having seemingly lost something unimportant, but something that she couldn't bear to part with.
From the situation inside, she might not be truly dead.
After seeing Ciatis's eyes light up, Klein went straight to the point.
Do you have the Ocean Songster's potion formula? Can I use something to exchange for it?
He felt that being honest and direct with a Beyonder from the Storm pathway was the best choice. Ciatis thought and said,
Use one of Her Highness's items for the exchange.
I only obtained a wine cup made of gold. It's already been crushed flat. Complicated patterns are engraved on it, with the elvish phrases Calamity and Kohinnim.
Klein didn't hide the truth.
I know about that cup. It was the cup Her Highness loved the most.
Ciatis said, unable to hide her excitement.
Deal.
The cup is outside.
Klein had no intention of heading above the gray fog in front of everyone. Ciatis nodded.
I understand. We will complete the transaction after we leave this book.
Having said that, she pressed her palms together.
The storm will definitely belong to the elves.
Before anyone spoke, she asked curiously,
What else did you discover there?
Some murals depicting the Elf King battling an ancient sun god.
Klein shot a glance at the ascetic, Snowman, who believed in the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God. With his back still facing the fire, the middle-aged man, who was facing the stone wall, finally opened his mouth.
No, he isn't the sun god. He is our Lord, the Father of all things, the great source of everything. He wasn't battling the Elf King, but taking back the authority which belonged to him.
Just as Snowman said that, Ciatis stood up and aimed her arrow at him. Suddenly, this elven songster's plaited black hair flared up in violation of the laws of nature. The strands of hair were distinct, and they were all swirling with silver lightning, emitting a strange, deep blue luster. Just as Ciatis was about to release the arrow, a huge grayish-blue palm appeared before her, blocking the arrow tip without any fear of being struck. It was the palm of the giant, Grozel. One of the traits of this race was its exaggerated limbs. They were so long that they appeared a little distorted. Therefore, simply by sitting there, he could stop Ciatis by extending his arm.
All right, Snowman, cut it out. As you know, Ciatis is an elf who likes to put actions before words,
Grozel said to the ascetic before turning his head to the elven songster.
Ciatis, we are companions who can leave our backs to each other. We have experienced plenty of dangers together. You can retort Snowman and even beat him up, but do not attempt to harm him.
As expected of the lead of the book, he's filled with positivity. But what's the difference in beating him and harming him?
Klein couldn't help but mumble. Ciatis grunted and sat back down, turning the mood heavy and silent with a level of awkwardness. Giant Grozel used his single vertical eye to survey the area before chuckling.
Then, I'll talk about my past. Before entering this book, I lived in the Giant King's court. I was one of the guardians of the Waning Forest. It's somewhere only our king can enter. Rumor has it that buried inside it are his parents, who also form the origins of us giants.
The giant king's court is formed of many parts, and the waning forest is one of them. Buried in there is the most ancient ancestor of the giants?
Klein listened attentively, only wishing to ask more. To him, this was more valuable than the fourth epoch's history. This was because the city of Silver's hope likely laid in the giant king's court. However, before he opened his mouth, Edwina spoke before him.
Grosel, what did the book look like when you received it?
Grosel raised his hand to rub his cheeks.
It had nothing, like an empty book waiting to be written.
I even thought that Grosel might be a completely fictional character in the book.
Klein deliberated for a few seconds and didn't directly ask about the details of the giant king's court. He turned to say to Mobit Zoroast,
Do you know of blasphemer Amon?
Blasphemer refers to the entire family of Ammon. They are the arch enemies of us Zoroasts. It's said that they have a very powerful and terrifying ancestor that even Ouroboros and Medici viewed with great importance. They even feel fear towards him, but no one knows of his actual name.
Mobet introduced in detail.
Ouroboros? Medici? Yes, back then the true creator and Rose Redemption supported the Solomon Empire.
Klein's heart stirred as he immediately asked,
Then, have you heard of the name Sasrir?
Mobet was taken aback as he slowly shook his head.
Never.
Dark Angel Sasrir's name and title vanished after the cataclysm? It was buried?
Klein confirmed a fact through this. Wakurio. At that moment, Snowman, who was facing the stone wall, said with a deep voice,
Sasrir is the Dark Angel, the leader of the kings of angels, the one closest to the Lord.
I was waiting for your answer.
Klein cast his gaze on the ascetic and asked in a deep voice,
Apart from him, Ouroboros, Medici, and Amon, what other kings of angels are there? You don't have to say out all their names.
Klein was afraid that it would result in unnecessary reactions, just like the Repenter in Afternoon Town. Edwina, Anderson, and Danitz were at a loss from the very beginning. This was because the contents of the conversation between Gehrman Sparrow and the few ancient figures were things that they had never heard of. They found it unbelievable that this crazy adventurer knew so many secrets. After a few seconds of silence, Snowman said,
There's also the Angel of Imagination, Adam.
Just as he said the name, the entire cave shook. The familiar and crazy tyrannical aura rapidly descended. King of the North Ulyssin had arrived. Chapter 699, Boss Fight. Lowen soldier Frunziar Edward, who was on guard by the cave's entrance, saw a massive figure descend from the sky just as he moved. It landed on a huge boulder covered in thick layers of ice. The wings, which were covered in a membrane of skin, weren't retracted as they continued spreading outward, nearly blocking out all the surrounding light. The illusory armored scales that resembled frozen ice and the violent, eerie blue dragon eyes were immediately reflected in Frunziar's eyes. He instinctively sensed danger as he raised his iron-black sword and leaped to the side, rolling far away from where he was standing. Almost at the same moment, King of the North Ulyssin opened its mouth, silently spewing out a distorted, icy blue flame towards the cave. It froze everything in its wake. Moments later, the icy blue flames produced a tidal wave, formed from illusory light as they surged into the dark cave, sealing everything it passed in ice. The words, Angel of Imagination Adam, were still flashing across Klein's mind, as he couldn't help but recall Emperor Rozel's description of the Twilight Hermit Order. Their mission was to revive the original creator, and they had a high-sequence Beyonder of the Spectator pathway among their ranks, or even the uniqueness. The means in which they summoned the members was through a true dream that connected the eastern and western ends of the continent. Furthermore, it had the characteristic of being detected upon being mentioned, but even so, he still instinctively reacted in response to the impending danger. He lunged sideways, dodging towards the uneven parts of the cave, attempting to use the rocks ahead to block the attack. However, the surging icy blue light was like a tidal wave that drowned every corner of the cave. It sealed everything, leaving no safe zones inside the cave. Seeing his surroundings turn into an icy cage, a gigantic, grayish-blue figure appeared before Klein's eyes. Groszel had stepped forward without a sound. He genuflected with his left knee, leaning his back forward as he stabbed the broadsword in front of him. Light that resembled the dawn of light bloomed as illusory walls formed to the left and right of Groszel, protecting everyone behind them. An icy blue tidal wave surged over, splitting at the erect broadsword before colliding with the light of dawn on both sides. Everything in the mountain cave turned dark for Klein and company before a small source of light was restored. They could still see that the bonfire had been extinguished. It was especially dark with the dim rays of light outside attempting to tear through the layers of ice. At that moment, every inch of space in front of Groszel was frozen. The giant seemed to become a bug stuck in amber. Right on the heels of that, the sword which was embedded in the ground emitted a luster resembling the light of dawn. They mixed together, enveloping Groszel before turning into a hurricane of light that swept outwards. Silently, the layer of ice had a huge hole burned through it as it extended all the way to the cave's mouth. Groszel's grayish-blue figure had vanished from where he was. Elven songster Ciatis, who hadn't had time to tie her head, held her bow and arrows. Embraced by the swirling gales around her, she charged out the cave without any delay. Dressed in an asymmetrical black coat, the Solomon Empire Viscount Mobet Zorro mumbled,
Don't be in a rush, or it's finally here.
as he ran, following closely behind Ciatis. Isai. The ascetic, Snowman, stood up as well. He tapped his chest 4 times, as though he was forming the shape of a cross.
May the Lord bless me.
Amidst his hoarse and dry voice, he stepped onto the biting cold ice with his bare feet and ran out of the cave. Klein didn't hesitate either. He didn't draw his revolver and he kept his hands empty. Together with Anderson, who was clenching Death Bracadont tightly, they ran into the hole in the ice. Dressed in a shirt with complicated patterns, Edwina Edwards looked at Danitz, who was trembling due to the aura of the high-level entity. She said with a gentle but emotionless tone,
Stay here.
Having said that, the look in her blue eyes deepened. Gales howled around her, pushing her out of the cave.
Stay here.
Danitz was stunned. He subconsciously surveyed his surroundings and saw the walls covered in frost and the completely extinguished bonfire. The cave was silent with him being the only one left. Danitz's trembling body slowly came to a stop as he turned to gape. However, he didn't say a word as he saw his captain's figure disappear from the cave's entrance. Outside the cave, Frunziar Edward, who had just rolled to avoid the first series of attacks, saw Ulisson spread its wings as it was about to leap into the sky, closing the distance between it and his party. He ensured his safety as he steadied his figure and pushed his left palm out diagonally. Immediately following that, he declared a statement in ancient Hermes.
Flying is prohibited here.
Suddenly, the frost dragon's wings that blotted out the sky seemed to be weighed down by invisible objects weighing 100 times its body weight. It began flapping them with great difficulty. The King of the North immediately let out a furious roar as the loud sonic boom drilled into Frunziar's ears, making his stagger. With a whoosh, the pair of wings finally managed to flap, stirring up the snow and frost around it into the air. Although it was difficult on Ulisson's part, it eventually managed to fly. At that moment, disciplinary Paladin Frunziar's expression turned solemn. He said a sentence constructed in ancient Hermes once again.
Violators will be punished.
Just as he said that, his figure leaped up at a speed which was faster than Ulisson, as though he had been augmented by some unknown power. Ding! Frunziar extended his body in midair as he brandished the iron-black sword in hand, striking down at the King of the North's neck with his posture speaking great certainty of a hit. A clear crack appeared on the crystalline armor plates as it spread slightly. However, this failed to make Ulisson bleed. The frost dragon didn't even feel the pain as its eerie blue eyes locked onto Frunziar. its expression cruel and tyrannical. It then lifted up its front claws while Frunziar remained in midair, without any means of dodging. At that critical moment, a hurricane blew over, pushing the black-armored disciplinary paladin away, causing Ulyssan's strike to swipe at air. Its strike caused an explosive boom, despite the miss. Elven songster Ciatis didn't hesitate to take action once she rushed out the cave, saving Frunziar immediately. Immediately following that, her hair flared up in violation of the laws of nature. They were distinct with swirling lightning bolts. She aimed her arrow at the large but slow flying target in the sky, King of the North, before firmly pulling back the arrow. The sky turned dark, as though dark clouds had gathered as lightning bounced through them. Unable to fly smoothly due to the disciplinary paladin's influence, Ulyssan suddenly pulled back its wings, swooping down at Ciatis like a high-speed train. At that moment, a grayish-blue figure that left one feeling safe had appeared in front of the King of the North's trajectory. Grosel genuflected once again, plunging the broadsword, which was unusable by human hands, in front of himself. Dawn-like light surfaced, forming an invisible, impenetrable wall. Boom! The collision between the frost dragon and Grosel was like a terrifying explosion. It shattered the layers of ice around them, pushing them outwards. Grosel failed to keep his footing firm as he flew out like a ball, tumbling past Ciatis before slamming loudly into the mountain wall. A huge amount of snow and ice stalactites crashed from above, nearly causing an avalanche. As for Ulyssan, it wasn't sent retreating. It remained standing in its original spot. Having had its swooping attack interrupted, its hind legs were in the ground as its body leaned forward. It shook its neck before aiming its open mouth at Ciatis. The Solomon Empire's noble Mobet Zoroast had long arrived beside Ciatis. Upon seeing this, he hurriedly extended his right hand and rapidly turned his wrist. Ulyssan forgot what it was doing despite having its mouth completely open. It stood there in a daze without continuing its attack. Suddenly, Mobet turned his head and spit to the side.
Boy!
The spit was ordinary, without any special traits to it. Seizing this opportunity, Snowman, the ascetic who came out, raised his arms as though he was embracing God's grace. Then he said to the elven songster in ancient Hermes,
God says it's effective.
With a sizzling sound, the flashes of lightning surrounding Ciatis brightened greatly as they surged out, entangling with the arrow. She released her grip as an arrow shot out. Boom! Dark clouds gathered in the air as a thick bolt of lightning smote down, augmenting that arrow. The arrow turned completely silver, as though it was shot from the god of lightning. It struck Ulyssan's forehead at a completely unavoidable speed. Layers of ice disappeared as the illusory armor plating cracked. The arrow stabbed into the King of the North's head, making it let out a deafening cry. Light blue blood gushed out and quickly froze as the frost dragon's ugly face shook violently as silver bolts zapped at it. At that moment, Klein and Anderson came out of the cave. Disciplinary paladin Frunziar had tumbled onto the ground before standing up again. Grosel extended his palms from the snow pile, rubbing his head. He didn't appear seriously injured.
With so many teammates, I don't have to be the main assault force. I can attempt to control Ulyssan's spirit body threads. From my observations, it doesn't seem to have the defensive abilities of a demigod. Of course, it's much stronger than a Sequence 5. A 5-meter radius is a little dangerous.
Klein looked at the frost dragon as he quickly had an idea. Chapter 700, Excellent Teamwork. King of the North Ulyssan's tragic cries rapidly turned into a roar. Following that, a snowstorm engulfed the area outside the cave, reducing the visibility to less than 5 meters. Howling gales swept up dense goose feathers as they covered every inch of space. Meanwhile, an icy blue halo rapidly extended outwards, clinging close to the ground. It left frozen ice everywhere in its wake as it passed. Klein, who had his vision and hearing affected by the blizzard, instantly had the corresponding scene surface in his mind. He hurriedly bent his knees and kicked his heels, jumping high up, allowing the icy blue halo to sweep underneath him. As for Mobet, Zoroast, who wasn't adept at combat, he was already too close to the icy blue halo when he noticed it. He didn't have the time to jump up. At that moment, he was hoisted up by his shoulders as the bottom of his feet had a tempestuous hurricane lift him up into the air. With this combination, he instantly flew up into the sky, avoiding the outcome of being frozen. Mobet turned his head and, without surprise, saw the deadpan Ciatas. This elven songster could only muster up strong winds to glide forward due to the law forbidding flight. Anderson, Edwina, Snowman, and Frunziar reacted accordingly, jumping in time and dodging the attack without succumbing to it. Only Grozel, who had just pulled out his broadsword from the snow, was hit in the legs by the icy blue halo, as he couldn't dodge in time. Layers of ice instantly surged upwards as Grozel stood on the spot like a frozen corpse. Whoosh! The exaggerated blizzard obscured all the Beyonders' vision, making them lose their vision of the frost dragon. All they could do was passively defend against any attacks. At that moment, Snowman, who hadn't dropped to the ground, spread out his arms once again and said solemnly in ancient Hermes,
God says it's ineffective.
The violent blizzard suddenly calmed down significantly. Be it the tempestuous hurricanes or the dense snowflakes, they were weakened or had been cut in half. Ciatas vaguely made out a gigantic face, with an ugly, lizard-like face. The broken arrow was still embedded in its forehead. Yulisan had taken the opportunity to close the distance between them. Ciatas didn't panic. The strong winds suddenly changed directions, sending Mobet and her floating backward. Meanwhile, her chilled, pale lips opened as she sang in ancient and abstruse Elvish.
The rocks are destined to be shattered by the waves. The trees are destined to be struck down by the winds. The mountains are destined to crumble by the lightning.
As every word in Elvish was rich and filled with meaning, the constructed sentences were extremely succinct. Therefore, the lyrics didn't waste too much of Ciatas's time. Furthermore, from the moment the first word was spoken and from the beginning of the beautiful and forceful rhythm, the winds in the blizzard began to experience changes. The howling sounds of wind turned chaotic as it spread out in every direction. Yulisan's massive figure once again appeared before Klein and company's eyes. When Ciata sang the third phrase, disciplinary paladin Frunziar had already pushed out his right palm and profoundly said in ancient Hermes,
Imprison!
Instantly, the frost dragon, which was about to rush Ciatas and Mobet, had frozen on the spot. Surrounding it were layers of transparent walls. And as Frunziar said that softly, Edwina, who had just found her footing, made her light blue eyes turn black. Inside them flowed a sticky liquid that seemed to be the manifestation of all the evil in the depths of one's heart. She gently clenched her right palm as Yulisan stood up with a roar, instantly ripping apart the effects of imprison. The frost dragon's eerie blue eyes were filled with blankness and pain. It seemed to be still immersed in the emotions of sudden madness and ruthlessness. Even though this was a state it was always in, to have it fully triggered was uncomfortable. Without a doubt, it was a dragon who found it difficult to control its emotions. Seizing the opportunity of Yulisan's brief pause, Anderson Hood condensed a burning white spear in his hand. Then, he bent his back and threw it out. Without waiting for the outcome, flames appeared under the strongest hunter's feet, turning the ice into liquid. Sow! The spear accurately struck the frost dragon's half-open mouth, quickly melting the thick armor plates of ice, with the excess force penetrating the upper part of its forehead. Yulisan let out another tragic cry as its hind legs stomped backward, sending its body lunging forward. It stayed close to the ground as it rushed towards Anderson with a terrifying speed. The only thing in its eyes was this worm that had dealt significant amounts of damage to it. Swing! The snow split apart as a deep and wide chasm opened up in the ground. It emanated all the way to where Anderson was as it continued extending. Bang! With its terrifying inertia, the frost dragon slammed into a boulder covered in thick ice, shattering its outer shell and cracking its interior. If Anderson had collided with it, the strongest hunter was bound to turn into meat paste. Even being brushed was likely to lead to his death. However, in a particular spot in the chasm where Anderson was originally standing, there was a dark hole that led straight down. It was just enough for a person to burrow in. Pah! A hand held on to the hole's entrance. Through the exertion of force, the strongest hunter with disheveled hair jumped out. After he threw the burning spear, he didn't dodge and panic. Instead, he directly used his Beyonder powers to melt the snow beneath his feet, and he burned the underlying soil. Silently, he created a hole that wasn't too deep. Following that, he sank himself into it by crouching, perfectly dodging the King of the North's charge. At that moment, a pure beam of light descended and struck Groszel, quickly melting the ice encasing him. Snowman had used an offensive blow to remove the restrictions placed on the giant guardian. With the explosive light of dawn, Groszel raised his broadsword and charged to the frost dragon with wide strides before cleaving down wildly. Bang! 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 Groszel was only 1 meter shorter than Ulysson's non-humanoid form. His strength was equally ridiculous. As he clashed repeatedly with Ulysson's front claws, occasionally wavering and retreating at times, he quickly recovered by taking a step forward and engaged his opponent. With the giant guardian occupying the frost dragon's attention, the others reacted accordingly with relative composure. Snowman maintained his spread arms as a sun-like halo appeared around him. It quickly spread outwards, warming up all his companions and giving them immense courage. Furthermore, he carefully ensured that it avoided the King of the North. Not far from him, Ciatis's hair flared up as she drew her bowstring. She shot out arrows that appeared to be formed by wind blades or lightning. Due to the massive target, every single one of her arrows had hit her target. Furthermore, all of the arrows struck the same spot, the frost dragon's shoulder. Mobet Zoroast worked with Groszel, occasionally stealing the thoughts the King of the North had and was about to execute, making it pause briefly. At other times, he would attempt to steal its powers, but in the few times he didn't have any success. With the pitch-black sword, Anderson carefully circled to the frost dragon's flank and attempted to strike a particular spot. Disciplinary paladin Frunziar brandished his iron-black sword, using prohibition and imprison to aid Groszel's brawl with the frost dragon. Without his restraints, even if the giant was a guardian, he would have long been sent flying, suffering from a fatal stomp or the spewing of breath. Klein looked at Edwina and raised his hand to point at himself.
Invisibility.
He didn't know if she had the ability to mimic this power. If it wasn't possible, he needed to consider using other methods. Mitigid ara. Edwina didn't ask why, as her light blue and limpid eyes immediately reflected Gehrman Sparrow's body, which lost its color and turned transparent. Following that, Klein's figure became faint and vanished. After confirming his condition, Klein quickly ran towards the intense clash between the giant and the dragon. With a roll, he arrived by the King of the North's left foot. Then, as he focused on dodging Ulysson's feet while it did battle, he emanated his spirituality to control the illusory black threads with the spirit-body threads vision he had long activated. Right on the heels of that, he would roll or leap around in search of space beneath or around the frost dragon. Sue! 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 Silver lightning arrows and pure azure wind blades landed in a small region, shattering the armor plates of ice, tearing apart the resilient skin. Soon the frost dragon's right shoulder was a swath of light blue. The corresponding claw's motions also appeared to slow down indiscernibly. Disciplinary paladin Frunziar acutely noticed this point. As he dodged the icy blue breath, he pointed in that direction and declared in ancient Hermes,
Death!
With a bursting sound, the blue blood flowing from Ulysson's right shoulder instantly dried up, and the tear allowed its translucent bones to be seen. At that moment, Edwina used a palm-sized brass mirror and reflected parts of Ulysson's body in it. She reached out her right hand and grabbed at the mirror's surface, pinching the reflection within. Then she forcefully pulled outwards. Ulysson's wound instantly worsened. It kept spreading as though it was about to lose one of its front claws. It let out a tragic cry as it suddenly raised its body, standing on its hind legs. Light blue light that was almost white surged out of the dragon. In a 100-meter range, the temperature plummeted, followed by a fearsome force. Suddenly, all the Beyonders were sealed in ice. Their bodies became extremely cold as they turned very stiff. They couldn't help but tremble. Ciadas, Mobet, Edwina, Klein, Grosel, Anderson, and Frunziar all shared similar symptoms. The only one who barely maintained his mobility was the ascetic, Snowman, thanks to withstanding the training of being frozen countless times. He maintained his spread arms, half-closed his eyes, and solemnly said,
God loves everyone.
Sunlight tore through the wind and snow as the warmth began to melt the feeling of being frozen. Bang! Ulyson sent Grosel flying with a claw, severely injuring the giant guardian by leaving a depression in his chest. It temporarily ignored the rest as it targeted Snowman, blitz-rushing him.
Snowman has no one protecting him. It's about to move beyond a 5-meter radius.
Klein watched this scene, feeling somewhat numb. He had the urge of running into the cave to pray to himself before using the sea god scepter above the gray fog to respond. At that moment, a scarlet fireball appeared beside the ascetic before the frost dragon arrived. Then, it exploded without any reservations, sending him flying. It was from the strongest hunter, Anderson. At that moment, Edwina had produced a fireball in her hand and threw it at Ulyson's back, but she failed to hit it. She was creating a passageway for Klein to phase over with the fire. She had learned from Danitz of this ability Gehrman Sparrow had.